If you are new with us, you've jumped in at a really, really great time as we are in part 2 of a series titled R&R. R&R is a series that God has placed on my heart that has been like a fine surgical procedure for me. Because as I've studied and considered the kind of rest that we're going to talk about, the kind of rest that God has secured for us, I have personally become more and more aware of how much I miss out on the privilege of living a life marked by peace and by rest. Maybe you know how that feels. And simultaneously, while I feel like I've missed out on this in a significant way in my life, I'm also full with expectation about the potential in which my life can change, and maybe the way in which your life can change, if we understand what God's invitation to rest is like. And as I spend time with you and as I hear your stories, I think we might be in the same boat. For many of us, our lives can be marked by these words. Just give me a head nod if this resonates with you in any way. How many of us feel overworked? Anybody feel a little bit overworked? Give me a head nod, okay? How many of us feel overscheduled, have way too many things on the calendar, all right? How many of us are just over-exhausted, right? Like the nap sounds like the most glorious thing you could ever have for your life, right? That's why you come to church. And the last one is over it, right? For some of you, you're just over it. You're so tired. You're so done. You've thought about throwing in the towel, maybe on your marriage, maybe on your faith, maybe on something else. And while I think many of us are tired physically, I'm more concerned about the tiredness that exists in our souls. If you're a Christian, you believe that your soul is who you are. It is your essence. It is your very being. And you only get one. You get two bodies if you're a Christian, right? You get the version of your body right now, right? We'll call that, the beta version, right? The one that's testing, right? And then you get your heavenly body, and mine's going to be perfect, by the way. It's going to be fantastic. Think LeBron James meets Michael Phelps meets Aladdin. That's my heavenly body right there. Jesus places such a high priority on the soul that he says this in Mark chapter 8, verses 36 and 37. He says, "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul?" Our soul is the eternal part of us. As John Ortberg puts it in his book, Soul Keeping, he says, your soul is what integrates your will, that's your intentions, your mind, your thoughts and your feelings, your values and your conscience, and your body, that's your face, that's your body language, that's your actions, it's all of who you are, into a single life. A soul is healthy and well-ordered when there's harmony between these three entities and God's intent for all of creation. God cares about your will. God cares about your mind. God cares about your body. And those three things interconnected are what make your soul. Your soul is who you are. It is of utmost value. It is the prize for which both God and Satan are in war over. I'm reminded of the words by the great American poet, Charlie Daniels, who once said, "The devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal." And here's what I know, that a restless soul is a vulnerable one. An exhausted soul is an easy target, and there's an enemy always looking for a soul to steal. Our soul, your soul, it's at stake, and it is the most important part about you. Is your soul restless? Is it tired? How would I know? Might be the question you're asking. Well, John Ortberg gives us a helpful diagnostic tool that I've adapted a little bit. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions right now this morning. And all I want you to do on your notes, go and take out your notes if you can, is I want you to make a mark, like a little tally mark on your notes for each one of these questions that resonates with you. All right, so here's the first question I want you to kind of take stock of as you kind of do inventory of your soul. All right, are you easily annoyed by people or situations? Don't look left or right now, okay? Are you easily annoyed by people or situations? Are you indecisive about seemingly small things? Like, do you go to a restaurant and have a minor panic attack because you do not know what to order, all right? Here's what I've learned about Loro. You'll know this about him if you ever go out with him. He always orders a quesadilla, which is a very smart decision. Here's another one. Are you overindulging? Meaning, are you eating a little bit too much food, if you're being honest, right? Are you going on a little bit too much of a vacation? Like, do you find yourself randomly going to Google flights.com to see where you can fly for as cheap as possible to just run away? Maybe that's just me. Are you overscheduled? Have you filled your calendar so full of things that there really is no time to breathe? Are you kind of proud that when people ask you, how are you doing, the answer is, I'm just so busy? Or are you just overindulging in Netflix? Like, have you binge watched too many shows, you know? Here's another one. Are you sacrificing long-term desires for short-term fixes? Here's what I know, that for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, debt is usually a soul issue, not a financial one. It's this decision we make to purchase and extend and overextend ourselves to try to fill a void inside of us because we are compromising our long-term desires for these short-term fixes. Are you making poor decisions? Are you making decisions over the last couple of months you look back and think, man, why did we decide to do that or buy that or say that? Are you avoiding difficult people or conversations? Again, don't look to your left or your right. Here's one that's really resonated with me. Are you assuming the worst of others? Do you have a critical attitude? Are you rushing from one thing to another? Are you in denial that one or more of these things that I just read on the list are your reality? Are you getting defensive as I've been reading this list? Are you shifting the blame to others instead of owning what is true? Let's all just take a collective deep breath right now on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Let's sit out. Because the reason why we're in this series, and the reason why I feel like it's so important for us to talk about rest, is because you can probably resonate with a few of the things that are on this list, which are evidence of the fact that our souls are restless and tired. And I want to tell you that these things are not personality traits, they're symptoms of an unhealthy, overly exhausted soul. And we live in a world that expects us to run at a pace that is unsustainable. And then we set unreasonable, unsustainable expectations on ourselves and the people around us. For many of us, this remake of Psalm 23 defines our life. In fact, it's going to be on the screen, and I want you to read it with me. It begins this way. Would you read this on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. The clock is my dictator, I shall not rest. It makes me lie down only when exhausted. It leads me into deep depression. It hounds my soul. It leads me in circles of frenzy for activity's sake. Even though I run frantically from task to task, I will never get it all done, for my ideal is with me. Deadlines and my need for approval, they drive me. They demand performance from me beyond the limits of my schedule. They anoint my head with migraines. My inbox overflows. Amen. Surely fatigue and time pressure shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the bonds of frustration forever. Amen. Here's the hard word for us today. Ooh, get ready. A hurried, restless life is nobody's fault but our own. We set the pace of our life. So I started working out a couple of weeks ago, and I decided to do this thing called a couch to 5K. Have you guys ever heard of those things? A couch to 5K? So basically the way that these things work, right, is they kind of help you every day, give you like a series of things that you can do to be able to kind of have the endurance to be able to run a 5K. Now, complete admission, I'm like on day 10 and I've done 4 of those days. But hey, I'm trying, all right? I'm trying. And one of the things that I had to do a couple of weeks ago is I ran on a treadmill while I was in Dallas. And treadmills aren't fantastic. They aren't the best, but they're a good option when you don't know where you are and you really can't go out for a run, right? And as I was running one day on this treadmill, this thought kind of came to me that for many of us, life is meant to be a walk with God. God has invited us to walk with him over and over and over again. You'll see God say, walk with me, walk with me, walk with me. But what ends up happening for many of us as we live in this world that continues to put more and more pressure on us is we begin to set an unsustainable pace. And so here's one of 2 things that happens, right? We kind of get bored with the pace that we're moving at because we look at the people around us and we begin to compare ourselves against them, and they've got more and they're accomplishing more and their kids are better off than our kids are. Their kids are in more extracurricular activities activities. And honey, they just bought the brand new minivan. They've got the Pacifica. I want a Pacifica, right? They just got the kitchen remodel done. Why don't we have the kitchen remodel done? And then all of a sudden we begin pushing our pace, right? We push the pace of our kids. We push the pace of our friends. We push the pace of our own life. And here's the thing, we're the worst to ourselves, because what ends up happening is over time, we begin to pick up the pace and we start doing this, right? And this is our life. Moving so fast, right? Trying hard, hoping that we can slow down, but we don't know how to slow down because we're not sure how this treadmill works, right? So what ends up happening is we run super, super fast, and then we end up jumping off completely. And the pace we end up setting for ourselves, Lord have mercy, bleeds into the pace we begin to set for others. We do this to our family. For some of you, the problem in your marriage is that every time you meet the expectations of your spouse, they just bump the bar up higher. And the pace gets faster and faster. For many of our kids, good enough isn't good enough. So we place expectations on them that really aren't about them, but are about us and our reputation. Some of your kids are playing sports right now, or taking that class to make you proud, not because it's for them. You say it's for them, but let's be honest. We do this to our friends. Some of us have unrealistic expectations about how available the people in our community should be to us. We get mad because someone didn't reach out when we didn't show up to group, or because we posted something cryptic about having a bad day on social media and no one wrote a comment or sent you a message. But if we're honest, I think we do this to ourselves more than anything else. Because some of us have set unrealistic expectations on who we are and what we can accomplish. We compare our lives against others, and a competitive spirit begins to rise up in us, so we try to push ourselves to go further than what is our reality and what is healthy. And then we condemn ourselves when we don't meet our standards, and we berate ourselves when we don't measure up. Or as a defense mechanism, we end up blaming others for why we're in the situation we're in the first place. And here's the problem of living at an unsustainable pace for our soul. Here's the problem of trying to run too fast for too long. Here's what ends up happening, one of two things. Either one, we keep on pushing until we burn out, or we eventually just burn out. And when we burn out, we're less likely to go back and try it again. Ronald Rolheiser writes it this way. He says, so much of our unhappiness comes from comparing our lives, our friendships, our loves, our commitments, our duties, our bodies, and our sexuality to some idealized and non-Christian vision of things which falsely assures us that there is heaven on earth. We are running so fast to try and find heaven on earth. And when that happens, and it does, our tensions begin to drive us mad. In this case, to a cancerous, and I love the word he uses because this, I think, describes so much of the human heart, a cancerous restlessness. You ever feel that inside? This restless sense that everything is not the way that it ought to be? You ever feel this way when you're at work? You ever feel like you're robbing your family because you're working too much, but then you're robbing your work because you're trying to be a good family member, or you're robbing your friends, or you're not able to cover it all? I had this moment a couple of days ago when I looked out on my phone, and in just 2 days, I had 121 text messages that I did not respond to, and I was responding to text messages all day. Have you ever had that feeling when you look at your inbox? There is way too much going on. This is me. Like confession. This is Colin Outerbridge at his core. And most people I know who burn out in church life or burn out in general don't ever take the ownership to acknowledge that they are the ones who set the pace for their life. No one else does. You set the pace. Your pace of life is no one else's fault but your own. This didn't become clear to me until about a year ago. when I learned something from one of my mentors, a pastor by the name of Wayne Cordero. Wayne leads a great church, and he wrote a book called Leading on Empty that I think every leader should read. And in reflecting on his church life, Wayne used this illustration of a child who loves their pet duck so much that they keep on squeezing it tighter and tighter. The kid who loved this pet duck so much squeezed it so tightly that eventually it suffocated and killed the duck. Poor duck. Wayne said, I'll never forget this. It has changed the way I think about life and ministry. He said, your church will love you so much that they'll squeeze you to death. Then you'll end up in the hospital and everyone will say, man, Colin should have taken better care of himself. That's me. That's my life. Your boss will love you so much that she will squeeze you to death. Your kids will love you so much that they'll squeeze you to death. But if we're honest, okay, let's just be frank and honest and upfront with each other. Your pride will love you so much that it will squeeze you to death. So listen to me. The lack of rest you're experiencing in your soul is no one else's fault but your own. And our restless soul will make it difficult for us to live in the moment, enjoy what's right in front of us, and embrace the gift of life. But Jesus offers a different way of living. He offers a life where the default rhythm of grace and pace of our life is sustainable. It is one of rest. It is one of longevity. It's a pace that isn't marked by laziness. It's a pace that isn't marked by distraction or denial. It's a pace of life that allows us to enjoy the journey and finish well. Jesus offers us true and real rest in the midst of our reality. And rest is a way of being, not doing, but a way of being that allows the soul to be at peace in the midst of any situation or circumstance. But in order to experience and access that kind of rest, it means that we have to respond. And so this series R&R, every single week that we go through it, the first word will be rest, and the second word will be an action that God has invited us into to experience that rest. And today what I want to talk about is the rhythm that God gives us of resting and releasing. You can write that down in your notes. Rest and released. Rest and release. It means we have to release or let go of some things along the way if we're going to experience rest. Jesus' invitation into rest is also an invitation into releasing. So look back at Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 and 30, and I want to focus in today on the nature of rest. And over the next few weeks, we'll give you practical tools on how to enter into the promises of rest that God gives. Today, we're going to talk about resting and releasing. So let's practice R and R this Sunday. Here's the first thing we've got to be willing to release, okay? Oh, this is going to be so hard. Release your control. If you want to experience the rest of God for your soul, you need to release your control. Look at verse 28. Jesus says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, you won't see this in the text, but you've got to get underneath it to see it a little bit more. Every time in the New Testament Gospels, Jesus invites someone to come to him or follow him. He asks that person to leave something behind. The disciples dropped their nets and they left their vocation and their families to follow Jesus. The young rich ruler was asked to sell his wealth and leave his position and power to follow Jesus. The disciples left it and followed him. The young rich ruler said, that's way too high of a cost. I'm unwilling to follow. So when Jesus says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, there's an expectation in the invitation that you will let go of something in order to go and follow him. We've got to release our control. Now, we would assume, right, that if somebody gave us an invitation to rest, that we would just say yes, right? Wouldn't we just assume that? But the problem is that invitation to rest comes at a cost, our control. And for example, we're not very good at letting go of control. Did you know that most people don't leave work on time or take their vacation time, not because their employers don't want them to take it. They don't take it because of control issues. They're worried about what deal they're going to miss, who's going to move ahead while they're gone. Culturally, North Americans are terrible at rest. Let me just give you some data because I think it's fun and also depressing. Americans forfeit 200 million vacation days a year. giving up $66.4 billion in lost benefits each year. It means that there is $66.4 billion worth of paid vacation on the table that we do not take as North Americans. The French do not have this problem, let me tell you. American workers use only 54% of their eligible vacation time. 23% of employees who get paid time off take all of their paid time off. It means that 77% don't. And we've gotten worse as the years have gone by. Did you know that adults in the 1980s took 4 to 5 more days off a year than adults in the current moment does? So we're overworked and we're overstretched and we're overtired and we're overscheduled. And if we're honest, part of the reason why we're feeling all those things is because we're under-rested by virtue of our own decisions. And the irony of it all is that employees who forfeit vacation are the lower performers, less likely to be promoted, less likely to receive a bonus or promotion, and more likely to report being stressed than the people who actually take all of their vacation. But people don't want to leave work because leaving work would mean losing control of their work. And Jesus says, no. I offer a different way. Come to me. The entry point to experiencing rest is in accepting Jesus' invitation to enter into relationship with him. St. Augustine would say, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. God's invitation to rest will not happen without your release of control and release of your calendar. Jesus is saying that the rest your heart longs for can be found in no other place than when you trust me with everything, including your job and the promotion and the effectiveness of the work that you're doing. There's a second invitation that can't be missed. Just because you come to Jesus does not mean you will experience the rest he offers, right? Because some of us are followers of Jesus and we're saying, Colin, I'm not experiencing this rest that Jesus says that he will give us because we come holding on to things that we should have let go of a long, long time ago. For too many of us, we enter into a relationship with Jesus, but we never step into the fullness of the life he offers. And Jesus' invitation to rest is not an automatic benefit. It involves a willingness to release something too many of us are willing to let go of. Our control, and here's the next one. This one should speak right to your heart. Our self-reliance. That's the second thing that Jesus asks us to let go of. We need to release control and we need to release our self-reliance. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, which asks this question, what in the world is a yoke? A yoke is a fitting place around an animal to help them pull their burden. So think of an ox, if you will, right? They've got to carry a lot of weight. So you'll place a yoke around their neck so that they can pull a significantly larger amount of weight than what the actual animal is capable of doing on its own. You use different kinds of yokes to pull different kinds of burdens. But if you don't have a yoke that is designed correctly to pull the heavy burden behind you, you'll break your neck or you'll get stuck. So when Jesus says, take my yoke, everyone in his audience gets what he's saying because they know what it feels like to be crushed under the weight of impossibly heavy burdens. Because they lived in first century Israel, where the rules and regulations were impossible to bear. In a religious society like the first century Israel, there were over 600 rules and laws you had to keep. It would be hard for me to remember all 600 of those. It was a rule-filled, works-based religion of the day that had been instituted by the religious elites that felt like an impossible burden to the audience that Jesus is talking to during that day. In fact, Matthew records it this way in Matthew 23. Jesus, talking to the religious leaders, says, you tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and you lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move a finger. Jesus is saying, the burden that you're carrying is so heavy, you don't have the yoke capable to carry the type of things that are being placed on you. So take my yoke, because it's designed differently and it can carry the weight. But we don't live in first century Israel. So what is today's burden? What are the things that we're carrying? Well, I made a short list. Tell me if this resonates with you. Today's burden is the cultural expectations and norms that are placed on us. Broadly, I think this is what the American burden looks like. Live in this neighborhood, make this income, go on these vacations, have your kids in these classes and on these sports teams, look like the people on the front cover of the magazine, be in this relationship, and be affiliated with these people. Be Pinterest perfect, Instagram worthy, and Facebook savvy. This is the world that we live in. But there's also a church version of this too, right? Because when we agree, church people, sometimes we just put burdens on top of existing burdens, right? We're like really good at that. Here's the church version of this. Get married, have your kids participate in whatever version or form of education your tribe thinks is the holy version of education, right? Do this amount of service, be involved in these ministries, keep a perfect home, use essential oils, don't do these things, and maintain this kind of reputation, right? But I don't want you to miss the brilliance of Jesus. Jesus doesn't assume that you are going to let go all of your burdens. His invitation is not, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden and offload all of your responsibilities, outsource your role as a parent, cheat your job, disregard your calling, and avoid drama at all costs. Like that is not what the text says, right? Jesus acknowledges the reality that there are burdens we're going to carry and that those burdens are good for us and expected of us. Instead, he says, do you want to feel like the burden you're carrying is light? Do you want to feel like the weight of responsibility you have as an executive in your organization is light? Do you want to feel like being a mom chasing 27 kids because you thought that was a good idea is light? Do you want to figure out how to deal with singleness in the season that you're in and feel that burden as light? Do you want to know what it is like to have a light burden? He's not saying get rid of the burden because that's not realistic. He's saying change out the yoke, because you weren't designed to carry this in the first place. Exchange your yoke of self-reliance. It's all about me, all about my ability to get it through, my ability to accomplish it, my ability to figure it out, my ability to reason and research and get all of the answers, and put on the yoke of God dependence, because you were never meant to carry the burden, but I can with you. Dallas Willard puts it beautifully when he says, if we're living, and just let this be a diagnostic for your life, okay? If we're living in Jesus' yoke, we won't push ourselves or others. Is that true of you? We won't force things. Is that true of you? We won't try to make things happen. Is that true of you? We won't hurry. The exchange of self-reliance for God dependence happens once for salvation, right? God, I depend on you for my salvation, but it occurs continuously in our spiritual growth. It is a moment-by-moment decision. It is a muscle that must be trained. Which leads to the third thing we need to release. So we got to release our control. We've got to release our self-reliance, and here's the third one. We've got to release our world view. We've got to release the way we see the world. Jesus says, take on my yoke and learn from me. For I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. Did you know that learning Jesus' way of life means unlearning my way of life? That to be instructed by Jesus means I've got to unlearn some ways that I've made it through life. We have to learn things that are not intuitive. Like no one has to teach my son how to breathe. No one has to teach my son how to take all of the chips I give him for lunch, crunch them up into a big mess, and throw them on the table. No one needs to teach my son, right, how to, I'm just venting right now, like how to take a full bottle of kombucha, open it up, and pour it all over the floors that are not real wood so it leaks in and makes little ripples. No one has to teach my son how to do those things. He naturally does annoying things, right? No one needs to teach your soul how to be self-reliant. It naturally does that. Now you might be saying, Colin, you don't know my teenager or my husband. Laziness is their default. That's what they know how to do. They don't know how to rest. Well, let me tell you, laziness, distraction, denial, that's actually a form of self-reliance. Because it prioritizes the self over responsibility. It says, I am more important than the people I'm entrusted to love, serve, and care for. And for many of us parents, laziness looks like scrolling on our cell phones instead of engaging with our kids, or wasting time at work for many of us, instead of giving our company the best we have for the time we're committed to be there and then shutting it down when it needs to shut down. See, lack of hard work does not mean that you will rest. In fact, did you know your soul can still be restless while your physical body is rested? But your physical body cannot be rested if your soul is restless. It's just incredible. See, here's the thing. We were raised with a way of thinking about rest, and for many of us, it was wrong. So I'm just going to say it, and you can be offended. The way you were raised to think about rest was most likely wrong. For example, some of you grew up in a works-based religious home. This is not the way of Jesus. Some of you grew up in a pull yourselves up by your bootstraps home. Anybody grew up in that kind of house? This is not the way of Jesus. Some of you grew up with a, if you want it done right, do it yourself kind of home, right? Like, we're good American people of the heartland, right? That's not the way of Jesus. It's the way of the Puritans, but it's not the way of Jesus. And if you want to learn how to rest the way Jesus has intended us to rest, you will have to let go of your worldview, because the way that it has worked for you might allow you to cope, but it is not the way that Jesus has invited you to thrive. And there's a big difference. Mark Buchanan writes this in his book. He says, in a culture where busyness is a fetish and stillness is laziness, rest is sloth. But without rest, we miss the rest of God. The rest he invites us to enter in more fully so that we might know him more deeply. The depth of your intimacy with God is directly connected to the level of rest you have in him. Think about that. Like, you want to be a mature follower of Jesus, how are you resting in him? Jesus is a great teacher on how to rest. No one in history was more effective than he was. Can we agree? Right? Accomplish as much as he did in 3 years. Start the greatest movement of all time. Save billions of people. I think he wins the day, right? He's got it. But Jesus never seemed to be rushed. You will not see him rushed in the New Testament. He was never hurried. He was never out of balance. And interestingly enough, Jesus modeled spiritual, physical, and mental rest for us in the pages of the gospel. Which means that Jesus, when he says, learn from me, is a person who can actually teach us on how to rest, because he showed us how to do it in the pages of the Gospels. So let me just give you a short list of things that Jesus did, okay? Jesus withdrew from others. He said no to significant needs in front of him. You know, he did not heal every single person that needed healing. Did you know he was selective with who his friends were? Like, one of the most ridiculous things I hear adults say, I'm just going to get off on a little tangent. One of the most ridiculous things I ever heard adults say, especially in church life, is, not everyone is my friend. There's like 500 of us. Not everyone is going to be your friend, and it is perfectly okay to be selective about who you spend your time with. We need to love everyone, but that does not mean we're going to spend the same amount of time with everyone. That's a false version of community. Jesus practiced spiritual disciplines. He set boundaries. He delegated tasks. And my personal favorite, he took naps. This is the way of Jesus. And Jesus' choice to rest, listen to me, disappointed people around him. And if you're going to experience the rest of God, there will be people that will be disappointed with you. And was misunderstood by the disciples who followed him. They did not get what he was doing and how he could be so calm in the midst of difficult times. But his choice to rest also gives us the freedom to embrace his way of life and helps us learn how to say yes to rest. And this is what we will learn about over the next few weeks. So let's be honest, okay? Is your soul at rest? Are you just exhausted? Is your soul at rest, or are you just restless? Are you like me and you pray and ask God to take care of something, and you know that the scripture says cast your anxieties on him because he cares for you, but you find right after you've prayed about it, you're picking it back up and stressing out about it? Are you like me and you WebMD every single thing in your life and start freaking out? Have you projected out the future of your kids and you're super nervous because you're worried about who their second grade teacher is going to be? And if they don't get the right second grade teacher next year, oh my goodness, they may not get into the college they don't want to go to anyway. Like, is that where your life is? Is your marriage a continual process of snapping at each other over dumb, stupid, small things? Because you're projecting your own brokenness on the person you're married to. Are you filling your life with distraction after distraction after distraction because you hate the stage of life you're in and you wish that you were somewhere else and you thought by now your pace would be faster and you would be further? So you're trying to figure out how to make this thing go faster. Because if I can just get this to get faster, if I can just accomplish more, do more, be seen more, have more answers, get the promotion, get the job, get the increase in income, then everything's going to be okay. I think the irony of all of that is that these are the hard lessons I'm learning in my life right now. Is that if the pace of life is too fast, and if the reason why that pace of life is burning me out, exhausting me, making me short, making me miss the moment of beauty right in front of me as my 2-year-old begins to say full sentences, and as my kids begin to grow and develop, and I get to experience this season of marriage with my wife, if my pace is too fast, then I will miss out on the most important things. So how's your soul? And is it working? Like, is your process for rest working? Or are your kids suffering because of your inability and your indecision to set the right pace? Are your friendships suffering because of your inability and your indecision to set the right pace? Is your health suffering because of your inability and your indecision to set the right pace? I know I'm asking you something big today. I'm asking you to release your control and to release your self-reliance. I know I'm asking something big. I'm asking you to release the way you think the world works, because it does not work that way. And I'm asking you to release it so you can receive the rest of Jesus. So here's the question. Will you release your way of life to receive Jesus' rest? That's the invitation. That's the journey for the next couple of weeks. So here's your next step. It's a hard one. It's taken me years. Here's your next step. Admit your need for rest. Ugh. Don't you hate admitting that you need something? That's what I'm asking you to do this week. I'm asking you to look at your schedule and look at your calendar and look at your life. Maybe your life is so filled with laziness right now, you realize it's lazy because I'm afraid to risk anything, and because of that, I have a restless soul. Or maybe your life is so overscheduled or so booked or so packed that the reason why it's that way is because, well, I just don't want to deal with me, so I fill my calendar with a ton of stuff. I'm going to ask you to admit your need for rest. Here's what it's been looking like for me, just tangibly, so you know. It looks like this. Every morning, get on my knees on the side of my bed, put my hands together like this, and I say, Father, I admit today the only reason I have breath and the only reason I have health is because you've given it to me, which means you're not done. And I know that my tendency is to fill my calendar with the stuff that I want to get done today, and sometimes, God, I think it's for you when it really is for me. And I'm asking you today to open my eyes, to help me see what you are doing so I can be a part of it. The fact that I have breath today is a gift. So God, thank you for my wife. She is undeserved. Thank you for my kids. They are undeserved. Thank you for our church. It is undeserved. And that centers me. And then throughout the course of the day, I'll hit my knees again. I'll turn the radio off in that 5-minute drive that I've got to the next meeting that I'm having. And the journey of centering and releasing is a moment-by-moment process of acknowledging that the only reason there's breath in my lungs is because God has chosen to give it to me. And He is the one who sets the pace. And when I release my control, and I release my self-reliance, and when I release my way of thinking about the world, I receive a rest that is good enough to hold me in any situation. So this week, would you admit your need for rest? Would you rest and release?